Hey everyone, and welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are diving deep into a topic that's been generating a lot of buzz lately, and for good reason, Bitcoin. We've received a ton of requests from you, our amazing listeners, to really unpack this whole Bitcoin thing.
Yeah, seems like everyone's talking about it these days.
Exactly. So we've been digging through articles, research reports, even a section from the Bitcoin Standard by Safety and Emis. And clearly you guys are hungry for more than just the surface level stuff.
Right. We want to get past the hype and really understand what's going on.
Exactly. So let's jump right in. First things first, for anyone who's maybe just tuning in, what exactly is Bitcoin? We hear all these terms thrown around: digital cash, revolutionizing finance, cryptocurrency. Where do we even begin to break it down?
It's a good question. Bitcoin is essentially the first successful attempt at creating a fully digital form of cash.
Huh.
It's completely decentralized, meaning no single entity controls it,
Right.
which is a huge departure from our current financial systems.
Okay, so unlike, say, my bank account, there's no central authority calling the shots.
Exactly. And what makes Bitcoin truly unique is its digital scarcity. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins that's programmed into the system itself.
So it's like digital gold. That's a comparison we hear a lot, but is it really accurate? I mean, gold has inherent value, right? But Bitcoin's value seems to fluctuate wildly.
That's an interesting comparison. Gold derives its value from a combination of factors: its use in industry, its historical significance as a store of value, but also its scarcity. Bitcoin, on the other hand, derives its value from its limited supply, its security, and the growing network of users who believe in its potential. The Bitcoin Standard actually makes a strong case for this digital scarcity being key to Bitcoin's potential to become a reliable form of money.
Interesting. So it's not just about being like this cool new technology. It's trying to solve some fundamental problems with money itself. Like what specifically?
Well, think about the properties of good money. It needs to be scarce, durable, divisible, portable, and recognizable. And Bitcoin actually checks all of those boxes.
Okay, break that down for me.
Sure, so it's resistant to inflation because of the fixed supply. It exists as data on a decentralized network, so it's incredibly durable. It can be divided into tiny fractions called satoshis, making it divisible. It can be sent anywhere in the world, instantly making it portable and fenced. It's becoming increasingly recognizable as a legitimate asset class.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But how does this whole system actually work? I mean, how are Bitcoins created in the first place? And what prevents people from just making more of them?
Right. That's where the concept of mining comes in. This is the process that secures the network and controls the supply of Bitcoin.
Mining. So we're talking like digital pickaxes and hard hats here.
Not quite.
Hmm.
More like powerful computers and complex algorithms. Bitcoin miners are essentially competing to solve these complex mathematical problems. The first one to solve the problem adds a new block of transactions to the Bitcoin blockchain. That's the public ledger that records every single Bitcoin transaction ever made.
Ah, okay. So it's a race to solve these problems, and the winner gets rewarded with Bitcoins.
It's exactly. Miners are incentivized to contribute their computing power to secure the network, and they're rewarded with newly created Bitcoins and transaction fees. This is the mechanism that ensures the integrity and security of the system.
Wow, this all sounds incredibly complex. Isn't there a risk that someone could manipulate the system? Like, what's stopping some evil genius with a supercomputer from just taking control of the whole thing?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of what makes Bitcoin so resilient. It's all about decentralization. The more miners there are, the more difficult and expensive it becomes for any single entity to gain control of the majority of the network's computing power, which is what they'd need to do to manipulate the system.
So it's like a numbers game. The more people join the network, the more secure it becomes.
Precisely. And keep in mind, this whole mining process requires a significant amount of energy. The system actually adjusts the difficulty of those math problems to ensure that new blocks are created at a consistent rate roughly every 10 minutes, regardless of how much computing power is thrown at it.
Oh, wow. So even if someone throws a ton of computing power at it, it doesn't really speed things up. That's pretty interesting. But we also hear a lot about Bitcoin being super volatile. Is it even practical as a currency if its value is constantly swinging up and down?
Yeah, volatility is a valid concern, and it's something we'll definitely dig into a little bit later. But it's important to remember that Bitcoin is still relatively young. It's only been around for a little over a decade. As adoption grows and the market matures, we can expect to see those price swings moderate.
So the idea is that it'll eventually stabilize and become more like a traditional currency, or does it have a different role to play entirely?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yep.
And honestly, it's one that has sparked some pretty intense debate within the Bitcoin community. Some people see Bitcoin primarily as a store of value like digital gold, while others believe its true potential lies in becoming a widely used medium of exchange.
Okay, so on one hand, it's a hedge against inflation and economic uncertainty, and on the other hand, it's a global currency for everyday transactions. Are those even compatible goals?
That's a great question. And to really understand the possibilities, we need to unpack the challenges Bitcoin faces in terms of scalability. Can it actually handle the volume of transactions needed for widespread adoption?
And I'm guessing that's where we're headed next.
You got it. We'll be diving into the scalability trilemma and exploring some potential solutions. That could unlock Bitcoin's potential for everyday use. Stay tuned.
Okay, so we're back. And last time we really dug into like the core concepts of Bitcoin, right? Decentralization, digital scarcity, that whole mining process that keeps the system secure. But we left off with a pretty big question. Can Bitcoin actually scale to become something that like everyday people use for everyday things?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It all boils down to what's known as the scalability trilemma.
Okay, trilemma, break that down for me. I'm not familiar with that term.
Sure. So essentially it means that any blockchain system, and this includes Bitcoin, can only fully optimize for 2 out of 3 key factors: decentralization, security, and scalability.
Oh, so it's like a trade-off. You can't have it all.
Exactly. You got to pick 2. So decentralization means no single entity controls the network, which makes it resistant to censorship and manipulation. Then you've got security, which ensures the system is protected from attacks. And finally, scalability, which refers to its ability to handle a large volume of transactions quickly and efficiently.
So where does Bitcoin fit into all of this? I mean, we talked about how resilient it is, so it sounds like it's prioritizing decentralization and security, right?
Good. Those are Bitcoin's cornerstones.
Yeah.
It's been incredibly resilient over the years, precisely because it's so decentralized and secure. But this does come at a cost. The base layer of the Bitcoin blockchain has a somewhat limited transaction capacity.
So how do we solve that? I mean, if we want to use Bitcoin to buy coffee, send money across borders, actually do everyday things, it needs to be able to handle the load.
Absolutely, and that's where the real innovation comes in. Developers have been working on something called Layer 2 solutions. These are technologies built on top of the Bitcoin blockchain that can process transactions much faster and cheaper.
Okay, that sounds promising. What are some of these layer 2 solutions? Give me an example.
Sure, the most well-known is the Lightning Network. Picture it as like a network of payment channels that operate above the main Bitcoin blockchain. So instead of every single transaction being recorded directly on that main blockchain, which can be slow and expensive, they're handled on this separate layer.
So it's like a separate, faster highway for smaller transactions?
Exactly. The Lightning Network allows for these like near instantaneous micropayments with super low fees. Imagine buying a coffee with Bitcoin or even like streaming tiny fractions of Bitcoin per minute for content, all without clogging up the main blockchain.
Wow, that's really impressive. It seems like the Lightning Network could be a real game changer, but what about some of those other concerns we hear about, like a 51% attack?
The classic 51% attack. This is where a single entity gains control of the majority of the network's computing power, and then could theoretically manipulate transactions or even double spend Bitcoins.
Okay, that sounds pretty scary. Is that a realistic threat?
It's theoretically possible, but in practice, incredibly difficult and expensive to pull off, especially as the Bitcoin network grows larger and more decentralized. You would need to control more computing power than every other miner on the network combined.
So it's like trying to outmuscle a giant. The bigger Bitcoin gets, the harder it is to attack.
Exactly. And even if someone did manage to gain that much control, it wouldn't be easy to manipulate the system without being detected. The Bitcoin blockchain is a public ledger, so any suspicious activity would be immediately visible to everyone.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. That's reassuring. So it sounds like Bitcoin has these multiple layers of defense built in. But what about government regulation? Couldn't governments just decide to ban Bitcoin altogether?
That's a question a lot of people have, and it's definitely possible that some governments might try to restrict or even ban Bitcoin. But you have to remember that Bitcoin is global and decentralized. There's no single point of control that a government can just shut down.
So even if one country bans it, it can still exist and be used in other countries.
Exactly. And attempts to ban Bitcoin could actually backfire. It might just drive it underground, making it harder to regulate, and potentially even more appealing to those seeking to operate outside the traditional financial system.
So it's almost like a game of whack-a-mole. Trying to suppress it in one place might just make it pop up somewhere else.
Yeah, you could say that. The more governments try to control Bitcoin, the more they might inadvertently fuel its growth and adoption. It's a fascinating paradox.
It definitely sounds like a tough nut to crack. So we've got this system that is decentralized, secure, resilient, but it also faces these challenges in terms of scalability and the whole regulatory landscape. Where do we go from here? What does the future hold for Bitcoin?
That's the big question, isn't it? In the next part, we'll explore the potential long-term implications of Bitcoin, its potential impact on the global financial system, and the different scenarios for its future. Will it become a dominant force, a niche asset, or something else entirely? Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the deep dive. So we've really gotten into like the nuts and bolts of Bitcoin, right? Its strengths, its weaknesses. But now I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the future. What are the potential long-term implications of this technology?
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting. We're talking about a potential, paradigm shift
Yeah.
in how we think about money and finance.
Whoa. Okay, so let's dive into some specific scenarios then. One that we hear a lot about is Bitcoin as like a global reserve currency. What would that world even look like?
Yeah, that's a big one. In that scenario, Bitcoin would be widely accepted for goods and services globally,
Hmm.
not just as an investment or speculative asset.
Right, so I could travel to any country and use Bitcoin for like everything
Yeah.
without having to worry about exchange rates or those crazy bank fees.
Exactly. But for that to happen, you need massive adoption, not just from individuals, but also businesses and, crucially, governments.
Right, and that's a pretty huge hurdle considering the resistance we already see from a lot of institutions. Plus, I mean, let's be real, can something that's as volatile as Bitcoin really function as a stable global currency?
That's a key challenge. For Bitcoin to be widely accepted as a unit of account, its value would need to stabilize significantly. Otherwise, imagine pricing goods and services in Bitcoin if its value is swinging wildly every day. No one would want to hold on to it for very long.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so maybe widespread adoption as a global currency isn't realistic. What about the opposite end of the spectrum than Bitcoin as a niche store of value?
That's definitely more plausible in the near term. In this scenario, Bitcoin functions more like digital gold, a safe haven asset that people hold to hedge against inflation, economic uncertainty, maybe even political turmoil.
So it appeals to a specific segment of the population, folks who maybe distrust traditional financial institutions.
Not exclusively, but they are definitely the early adopters. We're actually seeing individuals and even institutional investors start to allocate a small percentage of their portfolio to Bitcoin as a diversification strategy similar to how they might invest in gold.
But if it stays niche, doesn't that limit its overall impact?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As a niche asset, it wouldn't really challenge the existing financial system in any meaningful way, and its price would likely remain volatile, driven more by speculation rather than its use in everyday transactions.
Okay, so we've explored the two extremes, global reserve currency versus niche asset. But what about the possibilities in between? Could Bitcoin evolve into something entirely new, something we haven't even imagined yet?
That's what's so exciting about this space. One possibility is that Bitcoin becomes this foundation for a new decentralized financial system, what some people call DeFi, or decentralized finance.
Okay, I've heard that term thrown around. What exactly does that mean?
Imagine an ecosystem of financial services built on the blockchain, offering alternatives to traditional banking.
So we're not just talking about a currency anymore. We're talking about lending, borrowing, trading, all happening on a decentralized platform.
Exactly. And it's already starting to happen. DeFi platforms are emerging, offering these services that are open, transparent, and accessible to anyone with an internet connection, regardless of their location or credit history.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful vision. It sounds like uncharted territory, though. Are there risks involved?
Of course, DeFi is still in its very early stages. There are challenges around security regulation scalability. It's a rapidly evolving space with lots of experimentation. And to be honest, it's unclear which platforms or projects will ultimately succeed.
So it's a space to watch closely, full of potential, but also with a healthy dose of caution. I think it's safe to say that Bitcoin is more than just a currency or an investment. It's a catalyst for innovation and disruption in the financial world.
Exactly. It's challenging the status quo and forcing us to rethink how we approach money finance,
Yeah.
even governance.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating experiment that's still unfolding before our eyes.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into Bitcoin. We've covered a lot of ground from the basics to the potential future scenarios. Hopefully you've gained some valuable insights into this complex and ever-evolving technology.
Absolutely. As with any emerging technology, the future's uncertain. But one thing's for sure, Bitcoin has unleashed a wave of innovation that's changing the world as we know it. It's up to each of us to stay informed, engage in the conversation, and ultimately shape the future of finance.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.